Om Parthaya Pradibodhidam Bhagavata Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Gradhidam Purana Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitam Mridavashinim Bhagavadim Ashtadashadhyayinim Ambatvam Anusantadhami Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshinim. It's a famous verse which is supposed to be a meditation on Gita. It addresses Gita as the mother of universal wisdom, which pours the nectar of non-dualistic spiritual experience, which is taken from the Mahabharata. This is the essence of this famous verse of invocation, which is generally chanted on many occasions. Now we will come to the 5th chapter, 10th verse. The 10th verse says, Brahmani adhaya karmani sangam tektva karotiyaha lipyade nasapapena patmapatram amphasa. How a yogi lives in this world, how he should live in this world. That is the description here. What's the difference between a normal person who is not interested in spiritual life, who normally is attached to wealth, pleasure, and all the material comforts, who cannot think beyond the empirical pleasure, and how a yogi here means a person who practices yoga as a philosophy of life, how he differs from other ordinary human beings. It also gives a beautiful description of how to practice spirituality in our daily life. Often we make a distinction between the secular and spiritual, normally speaking. Secular life means social obligations, family obligations, the pursuit of wealth, enjoyment, comforts, and things like that. Spiritual pursuit means going to a temple or a church, prayer, meditation, confessions, and so on. So this is a big problem as to how to combine both secular and spiritual. So this famous verse says, you can live in this world and work in this world, be part of this world, go about your duties and responsibilities, not spiritual responsibility, but secular responsibility. See how to be an ideal wife, ideal husband, ideal brother, an employee, or a citizen, or a responsible member of society, and at the same time, practice spirituality. So the example is given. You take a lotus leaf. A lotus normally grows in lakes, water. If you look at the leaf, you find the leaf is not at all touched by the water. It doesn't get wet by the water, though it really grows in water. You dip lotus leaf within water, take out, you don't find any trace of water drops. Now, here in this example, life is the lotus leaf, and water is worldly responsibilities. Now, how can we live in this world without being worldly minded? That's a big problem. Worldly mindedness means attachment. And attachment means always connecting whatever we do with its immediate tangible result. That's why there is a great theory in metaphysics. Really speaking, there is no past and future. There is only present. Sometimes this subject is discussed in some of the Vedic mantras. Is it really possible for us to experience the future except as present? And is it possible for us to practice the past except as present? So we may plan for the future, but whatever we are going to experience in future is going to be experienced in the form of present. So future is actually like a line that you draw on water. It doesn't really exist. It exists only in our imagination. Past also is really non-existent. Past is gone. Even the past events we experienced only in the form of the present. What does it mean? Present is only reality. But we think about the future and we think about the past. Both are really non-existent. As I said earlier, we can never experience the future. We don't experience the future. You are planning to do something tomorrow. When we plan today at this moment, we think about the future. But what we are going to do tomorrow, we are going to do only tomorrow. And tomorrow is not tomorrow when you experience it. It is only present. In other words, when we really think in terms of past and future, then we think about the result of actions. And when we always link whatever we do with its immediate tangible result, then we start worrying about the results. We sometimes become anxious about it. It leads to depression, it leads to grief, it leads to all kinds of anxieties. If we can live only in eternal present, there will be no problem. In fact, that is the metaphysical doctrine behind the Buddhist concept of meditation on the momentariness of the world. That in fact this idea is actually taken from Vedic metaphysics. The eternal present. That's the idea behind. So if we can remove the past and the future ideas from what we do, there's no problem. So Gita says, concentrate on the present, because the past doesn't exist. Buddhism doesn't tell us the past doesn't exist. Buddhism doesn't tell us the future doesn't exist. It only tells us that everything is momentary. It doesn't refer to these two concepts. But Vedanta says, in reality, of course, Buddhism is a modern interpretation, humanistic interpretation, agnostic interpretation of the Upanishadic philosophy. So Gita says, concentrate on the present. Now, if we concentrate on the present, then we do not really take a rope and tie our own action with the possible consequences which are likely to happen in future. So Gita says, such a person who lives in the present, he completely detaches himself from the results of whatever he does. That's what Brahmani Adhaya Karmani Sangam Tektva Karoti means. Sangam means giving up all attachments, giving up all thought about the future results. One should perform his duties and responsibilities, surrendering, resigning everything to one supreme spiritual source, that is Brahman, the reality. That's the idea behind. If you can do that, then we can live in this world without being worldly minded. That means we can live as a lotus leaf lives in lake completely untouched by water. The water doesn't make the lotus leaf wet. Similarly, life in this world need not necessarily make us worldly minded. How is it possible? Every action can be converted into an act of worship. Worship, the word worship doesn't necessarily mean worshipping in a temple or a church or in a place of worship. That's not the implication. For want of a better term, by translating, we had so often the word worship is used. So, resigning everything to Brahman, looking upon every action as an act of worship, every thought as an act of meditation. One can live in this world, then every word, every act, every moment becomes spiritual. So the secular vanishes, or the secular merges with the spiritual. In fact, that is the ultimate goal of spiritual life. The line of demarcation between the secular and spiritual should vanish. And then what happens? Whole life becomes spiritual. In a way, this demarcation is only artificial. Really speaking, there is no demarcation. But at the beginning of spiritual life, when we are not able to spend a lot of time for spiritual practices, we have to set aside a few hours in the morning, maybe a few hours in the evening, or maybe 1 hour each for spiritual practices. That is necessary at the beginning. It is called formalistic practice of spirituality. But we should not stop with that. As we proceed further from formalistic worship to real spiritual life, the secular merges with the spiritual. Because it is not the act itself that decides whether it is secular or spiritual. It is the mind behind the act, the tendency, the attitude behind our actions that decides whether our actions are spiritual or otherwise. So Lord Krishna makes a very interesting point in this verse, Brahmani adhaya karmani sangam tektva karoti, etc. In fact, there is a famous verse in the early chapter, 24th verse. In fact, that's a very famous verse that we normally chant before eating food. It's called a Brahma Yajna mantra, means a sacred verse which describes whole life as a spiritual practice. That's the meaning. So, Brahmarpanam, Brahmagavir, Brahmagno, Brahmanakudam, Brahmaiva tena gantavyam, Brahma karma samadhina. This is the mantra. You think of a person sitting for a spiritual practice, formalistic worship, or in ancient times, rituals, Vedic rituals. You have to remember, in ancient times, during the Vedic age, there were no temples and there were no image worship. The kind of the method of worship that we normally find today did not exist, say, till about 3rd millennium BC, till the end of the later Vedic period, which took place around 3200 BC. 3200 BC is around the time which is normally accepted as the period of Mahabharata event. The Gita was instructed around that time. So, till the end of the later Vedic period, that means 4,000 years back, 5,000 years back, there were no temples in India. There were no image worship. Nobody used to worship in a temple. Nobody used to erect an image and worship different deities. Spiritual practice in those days were in the form of yajna. Yajna or yaga. Yajna means, the word English translation is sacrifice. But sacrifice has got many unfortunate connotations. Sacrifice means cutting goats, animals, and things like that. Sometimes very, very crude understanding. Absolutely wrong. In the yajna means offering life. I mean, leading life as a spiritual act. as a spiritual practice. That was the true meaning of yajna. So in those days, there were 7 types of Vedic sacrifices. Maybe in a very small, remote corner of India, all these 7 sacrifices still continue, are still preserved. And in fact, this Vedic ritualism has got an interesting connection with the Bay Area that you'll be surprised. In the year around 1972, most probably that was the year, a famous professor of Indology and Sanskrit, who was originally from Holland, who was teaching the University of Berkeley, started taking interest in these sacrifices and started going to India every year, often spending months and learning all about, as far as possible for a person who had not studied Sanskrit and Vedas right from the early days. His name was Fritz Stahl, S-T-A-L-L. He is famous for his outstanding contributions to Vedic studies, especially Vedic studies in a general way, to modern Indology. Now, he was the one who, and the great Italian scholar was Petrarca, and long before that, a few other great scholars who did not specialize on the ritualist portion of it. But anyway, just type good. He was a professor in the University of Berkeley, which actually financed and sponsored the publication of his 2 famous books. His most famous book, it is Agni, the fire sacrifice, dealing with the fire sacrifice. 2 famous volumes, each volume as big as the British Encyclopedia, huge volumes. Now, what I'm going to tell you here in this 24th verse, you find a graphic description of conceiving our whole human life as a sacrifice. The word sacrifice should be always understood as to mean a spiritual act, looking upon our whole life as a spiritual practice, and not cutting animals or anything of the kind. So the famous verse is Brahmarpanam Brahmagavir Brahmagno Brahmanakudam Brahmaiva Tena Gantavyam Brahmakarma Samadhina. So fire sacrifice involves a number of important ingredients. There should be a sacrificer, the worship, equivalent to worshipper, the one who performs this Vedic sacrifice. And then there should be a fire. Fire was looked upon, Agni is called, was looked upon as the medium for all sacrifices. Agni was looked upon as a deity representing the fire principle. The Sanskrit meaning of the word Agni gacchati the Agni, means the one who goes before you. So Agni or fire was symbolic of the divine principle that takes the results of your spiritual sacrifices to different deities. So a burning fire is necessary, and a performer, a worshipper is necessary. Then you need a number of ingredients that you should offer into the blazing fire. It could be milk, cooked rice, maybe curds, what we call yogurt, and different things which are normally used for consumption. They were offered to the fire. Not that this fire will eat it. It is our way of offering our own ego, offering our ego as a sacrifice before this eternal spiritual source. Brahman is called. Brahman was the eternal spiritual principle which the source of this universe the sustaining principle behind the universe, and which is the point of dissolution, the final destination of this cosmic life. That was the principle, the all-pervading, the immanent, the absolutely transcendental principle. That's Brahman. So fire should be looked upon as Brahman. The performer, in Vedic terminology, he was called Yajamana, the one who performs the Vedic sacrifice. He should also be looked upon as Brahman. What you offer into the fire should be Brahman. The act of offering is also Brahman. And the ultimate result also should be Brahman. That means, if we can look upon ourselves, what we do, its result, and our ultimate spiritual destiny as one eternal spiritual principle, we can look upon our whole life not as a physical entity that comes at one point of time in the past and it ends with a piece of stone in the cemetery. Nothing of the kind. If you look upon our life as a physical existence, then it begins when you are born, and it ends maybe after 100 years when the dead body is pushed through that tube in the crematorium. That's the end of the journey. In that respect, we are not very different from a piece of stone, a rock, or a brick. We are not different. But Vedanta looks upon physical life not as a physical existence that comes to this world when we are born and that lives for 100 years and ends at the crematorium. It is something beyond that. It is a spiritual act. Whole life is a spiritual act. So Brahmarpanam, the act of offering sacrifice in the fire, is Brahman. Brahmagno, Agni, the fire, the burning fire, into which we offer, that is Brahman. And what we offer, that is Brahman. The one who offers is Brahman. The ultimate goal is Brahman. And the ultimate destiny is Brahman. That means, Brahman here means the eternal spiritual source, the eternal fundamental absolute spiritual principle. So, whole life becomes a spiritual act. That's how the secular merges with the spiritual. So this mantra is often recited when we eat our food. The mantra is very famous. It is called a Sanskrit verse from the Gita. It comes in the 4th chapter, 24th verse, where it describes the whole phenomenon of human existence as a spiritual act, not as a physical act, not as a special gift that a compassionate God gives us one day and makes us go through this miserable existence and finally condemning us to hell or heaven. Nothing of the kind. It is, the whole life is spirituality. That means God is not a person that we are going to meet after death. God is a person that we are communicating with, whose presence we experience in our daily life. So every act becomes a flower that you place at the feet of the Lord. The Lord is not someone who sits above the clouds or in the temple or a church or anywhere else. It is that, of course, these places of worship do have their importance, where a large number of people gather in any sacred place, a church or a temple or a synagogue or a mosque or a Buddhist center, anywhere. When a large number of people, spiritually oriented people, spiritual seekers, come together and offer the worship, the meditation, then this spiritual power will manifest on that spot. That is true, but that's only at one phase of our spiritual evolution. Going beyond that, we should be able to see God's presence not only inside the temple, inside the church, but also outside the church and outside the temple. Means everything is a presence of God. Whole life is a spiritual life. Only spirituality exists. That's the meaning of this mantra. Now, this is the ultimate goal of every yogi. This is how your life becomes spiritual. That's how a yogi lives in this world. Now, for such a yogi, living in this world is like a lotus leaf growing in a lake without being touched, without getting wet by the water in the lake. Now, how do we do this? This is a question. As I said yesterday in the last class, the first principle is that we have to cut the chain that links our life, our activities with the results, the immediate consequences of what our actions are going to produce. Means, normally when we do something, we become very anxious. We start worrying about its result. Everyone. If there is anybody who doesn't worry, who doesn't think at all about the results of his actions, he should be a yogi or he should be a fool. That is the real analysis. In Sanskrit, there is a famous verse, Prayojanam anuddisya na mantopi pravartade. Even a dull-witted man, even a fool won't do anything without some idea in mind. Maybe foolish idea, but that idea, that plan is necessary for everyone to do something. That's the idea behind. So, but then Gita says we should do things, we should do our duty without worrying about the result. It doesn't mean that we should not have a plan. It doesn't mean that we should not have an idea as to what we are going to do. What is meant is we should not be too much attached, which means we should not be too much obsessed with the result of the action that we are doing, with the result of what we are doing. If we are not obsessed with the result, then we don't become anxious. We don't become depressed. So we must be able to look beyond the immediate result, the tangible result. The tangible result will be only short-lived. It won't be eternal result. If we can do something for its own sake, more or less Kant reached this conclusion in the 18th century when he wrote the Critique of Practical Reason. Kant's concept of duty for its own sake, duty for duty's sake, and this idea of a universal moral order, universal morality, comes very close to this. The problem was that Kant could not go beyond and think of a spiritual result, a spiritual effect. He could not think of this duty for its own sake as a medium for our spiritual progress. But anyhow, the idea is related to this. If we can break the link between what we do and its immediate result, that's first step. Second step is spirituality should be taken seriously. Very often people ask this question. We read, we meditate, and we go to churches and temples, and still there is no result. In most cases, there is only one cause. The cause is most of us take spirituality as one of the innumerable options that we have, one of innumerable pursuits. Just as Swami Vivekananda said, you buy a new Japanese vase, so also you start a new meditation process. Swami Vivekananda, more than 120 years back, 1897, he made this statement, traveling in America. When somebody asked this question, if we look upon spiritual life as just as one of the several options, then we cannot become spiritual. Spirituality should be the option, the only way out. Nobody can really start spiritual life unless that person decides that he cannot have any life other than spiritual life. So the practice of yoga begins with breaking this chain, thinking beyond the result orientation, thinking beyond the immediate pragmatic utility of what we are doing, thinking beyond pragmatism. Pragmatism minus idealism can make us either animals, machines, or monsters. If we have no idea to guide us, no higher ideal, if we are led exclusively by utilitarian principles, maybe if we go by the teachings of J.S. Mill, who defined utilitarianism as something that brings you the maximum amount of pleasure, then we are either Epicureans, hedonists, or if you add the efficiency ideal to that, we become monsters or machines, lifeless machines. Idealism minus pragmatism can degenerate into utopian theory, utopianism. Both are equally bad. So a blending of the best of pragmatism and idealism, that's what is required. That's why Gita's concept of yoga is as realistic as it is idealistic. It is, in a way, it's a harmonious synthesis of the highest pragmatism and the highest idealism. It doesn't forget the reality of the world in which we are living. It doesn't forget the reality of the problems you are facing. But it only asks us to look beyond the present. Means looking upon the problems not as problems but as challenges. And these challenges can be faced by converting our action into action and contemplation. Karma should be translated into karma yoga. It's the idea behind here. Now, again, the same idea is repeated in the next verse. Kayena manasa buddhya kevalehi indriyairabi yogina karma kurvanti sangam tektva atma shuddhahi. The same idea. A yogi, he performs all his actions with his body, mind, his senses, his intellect, everything, whatever resources he has got, without attachment. He may have some idea in mind, purification of mind, purification of spirit, spiritual purification. This idea needs a little explanation. Sometimes back I said, human mind is sometimes compared to a lake. Human character is compared to a lake. A lake full of filth and dirt and weeds and all kinds of wild growth. Maybe it is 100 feet deep, but on the surface there may be, say, about 5 meters of pure water. 95 meters or 95 feet full all different layers of wild growth, weeds, and so on. You can't see the bottom of the lake. Now, yoga is really an attempt to clean up this lake. Through the practice of action without any selfish motive, this lake slowly gets cleared up. All our mind is full of different tendencies and impressions. Many of these tendencies are good. Many of them are not so very good. That's why whenever we try to undertake any noble act, there is a resistance from within, not only from outside, but from within. That's a much more serious challenge. We want to do many wonderful things. When we read a good book, when we listen to good lectures, sometimes when we listen to music, any of these experiences may suddenly give us the impulse to do something noble, something wonderful. Maybe we want to start a new chapter in our life. We want to completely modify our routine, our daily activities. But then when we try to do that, we feel there is a mental block, an inner conflict. It comes from within. Both are from within. When we listen to a noble idea, we want to practice it. We want to implement that in our life. There is a resistance. And also there is a resistance. People who are led very disciplined life, when they happen to read a book which may contain many undesirable teachings, or they talk to people who may supply many undesirable ideas, that can happen. Our contact and association can be creative and also destructive. So sometimes when we meet people who may tell us who may give us many undesirable ideas, and they may even prompt us to do certain things that we normally won't do, not good actions. Then also there is a resistance. No, we should not do that. So many people who are used to telling the truth, when tomorrow I'm going to tell a lie. At the time of telling lie, the person may tell the truth only. And people who have never told the truth in their life, they make a strong decision, I'm going to tell a truth. At the time of telling the truth, it becomes a lie only. So, sometimes we find that for every willful act, there is an inner resistance, a conflicting thought current that comes. Why? Because our mind is like a lake. It is full of good tendencies and bad tendencies, good impressions and bad impressions. The simple principle in Patanjali Yoga Sutra, that accepted in Gita also, is this: whatever we do consciously will have its impact in our character. Character is sometimes called, in the Sanskrit books, you find antakarana or internal organs, which has got 4 compartments: mind, the memory system, mana, chitta, then ego consciousness, and also the intellect. These 4 components. Character, let us say character. Whatever we do consciously, it will have its impact on our character. And our character decides what we do. Both are interrelated. See, when we do something very consciously, with a lot of application, if the result is not up to the expectation, then we have a tendency to avoid it. If it is up to the expectation or more than the expectation, then we may have a tendency to do it again. And these thought currents may re-emerge later, either in dreams or in the form of memory. Both are possible. So, these thought currents will come either as help or as a resistance. So, our character is like a bundle, or like you may call it a bundle of tendencies, good and bad tendencies. Not only tendencies related to what we have done in this life, but also it includes tendencies and impressions related to what we have done in the previous life. The simple principle in Vedanta is this: if you remember something with a name and form, if the memory or the inherited tendency is very concrete, it relates to our experience in this life. If it comes as an abstract idea, it relates to previous life. If you have seen an elephant 10, 20 years back, and if you remember, the elephant's form will emerge in your mind, a visual form, in mind, not before the eyes. And also if it has a name, the name also, name and form. But there are certain abstract tendencies and impressions that emerge in the mind, either in the form of help or in the form of resistance or conflict. They come from another source, previous life. Name and form we don't know, but abstract tendencies, impressions, inherited tendencies, certain tendencies that we are not able to resist come to the surface. So the only way is to go on enriching positive tendencies by doing positive actions. And every action, every act, every thought, whatever we do without any selfish motive, without any strong attachment, will increase positive tendencies. That's why it is stated here in the 10th verse, Brahmani adhaya karmani sangam tikta karoti. Anybody who does his duties, responsibilities, with mind, with body, with intellect, whatever resources we have got, without attachment, with a sense of complete resignation to the ultimate spiritual source, that person is able to enrich his mind, and his character becomes more and more noble. The resistance against doing good deeds slowly decreases, and that person can evolve in spiritual practice. That's why whatever may be the method, reading good books, talking to people who will share your spiritual ideas, whose association will help you to reinforce and enrich your own spiritual tendencies, listening to such lectures, even watching TVs depicting the lives of great saints and sages and spiritual seekers, all these will help us to reinforce, to enrich our inherited spiritual character. So, this bundle, which contains good and bad tendencies can be reduced, their power is reduced in direct proportion to the increase in good tendencies. So that's why the 11th verse, Lord Krishna says, by mind, by body, by intellect, we must do our duties and responsibilities without any sense of motive. Now the opposite picture is given in the 12th verse, Yukta karma phalam tiktva shanti mapnodi naishthigim ayukta kamakarena phale sakto nipathyate. The point is both pictures are given. A yogi, yukta means yogi, who does his duties and responsibilities, goes on increasing good tendencies, he is not attached, he is completely free from any attachments. And that person attains peace within. On the other hand, people who do everything with worldly attachment, they get trapped in this web of worldly attachment. Now, there is another moral principle behind. The moral principle is this. According to Vedantic philosophy, all evils, all wrong actions, you may call unethical activities, are due to attachment. So there's a very interesting principle, Vedantic principle, Vedanta's contribution to ethical philosophy. Vedanta says ethics has got a very interesting relationship with Vedanta philosophy, with attachment. You find, you observe anybody, any person who may be doing something which we don't normally approve of, there will be selfishness and attachment behind. Some kind of attachment, selfishness behind. And on the other hand, the best way to get out of the tendency to do unethical things is to reduce selfishness and attachment, to be non-attached. Nobody will do anything wrong in a disinterested way. Well, I did it. I did a harm to him. I didn't want to do it, but I did it out of for the good of others, not out of attachment. Nobody would say that. Any harmful deed or thought or act has its source. It's rooted in attachment. Attachment should be understood, obsessive attachment. Here, sometimes, in English books, this word sometimes may need a little more explanation. The word attachment in Vedanta implies a kind of bondage. When we do something, we feel bound by it. We feel our freedom is cut short. We feel enslaved by something. We can't get out of it. That's the meaning of attachment. Asakti, Sangha, the Sanskrit terms. There may be the English translation. The simple translation, the word attachment It may not be a sufficient, maybe not be enough to express the true connotation, implication of the word. So attachment here means any act, any feeling of mental bondage that makes us enslaved. We feel we are enslaved by something. People do certain things. Well, I didn't want to do that, but I did it out of attachment. So the first principle in yoga is to break the chain that acts as an enslaving mechanism, as a bondage that reduces our freedom, that cuts short our freedom, that makes us a slave in this world. And yoga is a path that opens the door to freedom. If one does the same act, which normally binds you to the world, if you do the same act without attachment, you can do it as a master. So yoga makes us masters of ourselves, masters of what we do. On the other hand, if you are attached, the absence of the yoga ideal makes us slaves. Yoga is the royal road leading to freedom. We can work in this world, live in this world, do our duties and responsibilities without anxiety, without botheration, as our own masters. Otherwise, we have to act. There is no choice. Every human being has to work. If not mentally, either or physically. There is no way. Every moment, every second we have to be active. Even if you are sitting in an easy chair, your mind will be active. So that's why Lord Krishna said, Nehi kashikshanamabi jadu tishtati akarma krita. Nobody can remain quiet even for one split second, physically and mentally inactive. Impossible. So you are doomed to act. If you don't try to practice yoga and act as your own masters, you have to work as your own slaves. So better to make an attempt to practice yoga. That's the message of Gita. Anyway, we will have interaction after this. But before interaction, I want to make an announcement. This is the last class before the summer recess. The next class will be on Friday, September 19 at 7:30. So please remember, in the same hall. This is the last class before the summer recess, which begins on 30th June through September 13. So the next Friday class on the same topic, Bhagavad Gita and Yoga, will be on September 19th, Friday at 7:30 p.m. in the same hall. Thank you. Now we can have some interaction before the conclusion. Any subject.
In the modern society, we are so result-oriented in our professions, and we're judged based on the results that we get as doctors or lawyers or whatever the profession is. How do you detach from that result when so much depends on your success and not become anxious? Because when failure occurs, it's sometimes harmful for people that are counting on you.
Yes. Here again, attachment and detachment needs some explanation. Gita itself, the text answers your question. It says the difference between a person who normally works in this world with a strong motivation, ambition and attachment, and a yogi who does the same work. The difference is only in the attitude. The question is whether it is psychologically possible to practice non-attachment while being active. So that's because people are afraid that non-attachment could make you indifferent or negligent or inefficient or disinterested in what you do. You need not. In fact, if you are not attached to the immediate result of your action, you will have more surplus energy, mental energy, psychological energy that could be used for doing your work more efficiently. Attachment creates anxiety. It always, attachment means botheration, worry about what is going to happen to the work I'm doing. That worry becomes a kind of anxiety in psychological world. Anxiety can cause distraction, dissipation of energy. Mind gets dissipated. So, if you are not attached, in fact, you can concentrate much more easily. So there is a famous verse I can quote this: Saktaha karmani avidvamso yatha kurvanti bharata kuryat vidvan tatha asaktaha chigishuhu lokasangram. This is the verse. The translation is very, very, very penetrating. It says, on the one hand, there is the person, as I said, who is fully motivated, who works efficiently with great enthusiasm but full of attachment. He works very hard, 13, 14 hours a day. And in the evening he comes, he can't sleep perhaps. He has to take drugs. Or he is worried, job insecurity, or many other problems. Now, take a yogi in the same position. The yogi also works maybe 13 or 15 hours. But after doing the work, he says, well, I have done my best. So there you are attached while doing work, and then you are able to detach yourself. This can be practiced by frequent association with these ideas, by reading or listening to. And again, sometimes people are forced to practice this because constant, if people start taking drugs for anxiety, neurosis, and depression, frequently it can affect our health, psychological health. So sometimes they do practice. Gita says tatha means with the same enthusiasm, with the same efficiency, with the same application, a yogi does the same work. The difference is not attached. In the sense, he does this work, well, I have done my duty. This is my duty. Attachment is not a necessary ingredient in any profession. Attachment is not so very essential for efficiency. It's not necessarily. You look at many of these great people who did, their lives are examples. Of course, they were not doing work in the Bay Area, in the IT companies, of course. Gandhi could do that. Gandhi was a yogi, we can say. In fact, it could be practiced even in modern professions. After doing work with great enthusiasm, great efficiency, well, I had done my duty. Then forget. That could be practiced. So Vivekananda in modern times, speaking on Karma Yoga, he says attachment and detachment. The first step in the practice of Karma Yoga, the first step is the practice of both attachment and detachment. While doing the work, do with all enthusiasm, efficiency. After finishing it, well, I have done it, my duty. That gives you psychological rest and saves you a lot of anxiety and botheration. So that's the idea behind. So detachment or non-attachment doesn't imply indifference or negligence. Rather, it saves a lot of energy, mental energy. That will help us to do our work more efficiently, without dissipation. That is the message. I think it's clear. Okay. It could be practiced. In the beginning, we may not be able to implement it. But if every day, if you read these ideas, slowly we find, well, when you feel worried, when you feel anxious, well, Gita says, or it is said that we should do this, our duty. Then slowly, unconsciously, you will start practicing it. Slowly it becomes natural to us. Whenever worry comes, anxiety comes, immediately this idea comes as an antidote. This idea. Any?
In a way, the attachment, as I see it, is the tendency to please others so that you get advancement or you get acceptance. So,
or to displease others, both can be. Attachment to one person always is one side of the coin. A person who is attached to one person will be adverse to another person. Otherwise, it is a coin with two sides.
No, I didn't mean attachment to one person. I mean attachment, pleasing people to reach a private, a selfish aim.
Ah.
See, I think that is the trap. If we feel
Yes.
I have to do this, or
Yes.
my boss won't like it, I have to do this, or somebody won't like it. Whereas all we can do is our best anyway.
Yes.
And
True.
somebody won't like it anyway.
Yes. Yes, that's true. Attachment, it enslaves us. That's the psychological effect. We feel enslaved. It's non-attachment gives us the feeling we are the masters. So non-attachment breaks this chain that binds us to this. So as you said, on the one hand, it acts as a tendency to please, going out of the way. On the other hand, it also obsessive hatred. Obsessive attachment and obsessive hatred. These are the two sides of the same coin. They cannot function with only one side. That's why raga and dvesha in Sanskrit, they're duals, dvantas we call. On the one hand, we are attached to something. That person will be adverse to us, its opposite. So one can, that's why it's called sometimes yukta is translated as self-poised equilibrium, without tilting in either direction. It gives us the feeling we are the masters. And secondly, you don't feel the need to please anybody when you practice yoga. You don't feel the need to please anybody, because you have to please a higher consciousness within ourselves. So when we are in perfect harmony with it, we don't feel the need to please anybody else outside. That's the thing. If you understand.
Well, I was wondering about the verse from the 13th chapter that was a favorite of Swami Vivekananda. And it's the one about seeing the divine everywhere and not destroying the self by the self
Yes.
in order to get to the highest goal.
Yeah.
And it seems to me the same idea, perhaps, that the obstacle is not the opponent, the person we're attached to, that we're hating, all this kind of nonsense. The obstacle is ourself,
Yes.
our own mind, that would interfere, that would destroy our own true self.
Exactly. Yes. That verse, when we start practicing non-attachment, slowly we are increasing our identity with Atman. But when we become attached, we move in the opposite direction. So, uddhared atmana atmanam na atmanam avasadit atmayeva hi atmano bandhu atmayeva ripuratmana. This is the verse. So ultimately the word Atman means mind. In this particular verse, the Atman is not used in the sense of universal self, but mind. According to one hermeneutic principle in Vedanta, hermeneutics means the science of interpreting scriptures. Words, the meaning of words depend upon the context, the contextual interpretation of words. It's called. So, in certain contexts, the word Atman could mean mind. In this verse, the Atman means mind. But mind is our enemy, mind is our friend. So, when we do things with obsessive attachment, full of attachment or aversion in one direction or other, we are bringing down the mind. And that's not the right way to the realization of Atman.
Swami, what is the difference between a true abstract idea that's actually coming from within you, that you referred to, for things you bring with you when you come, and just
Oh, yes. That's true. In a way, in life, we will be able to recognize it. See, plain delusion is a schizophrenic problem, that they will be totally irrational. But there are certain inherited, strong tendencies in our character. And when we follow those tendencies, we feel we are in line with our own personality. But delusions and illusions could create disharmony. See, I can give an example. People who, may be born under certain circumstances which may not be conducive to spiritual life, suddenly develop a strong tendency for spiritual life. And when they enter the spiritual life, they feel perfectly at home, harmony. In that case, the tendencies are coming from another source, not in this life. But if it is delusions, there will be disharmony. Any kind of unnatural delusions in psychiatry is called, some kind of delusions, some ideas which may be totally irrational. It always creates conflicts and disharmony. And it disturbs the integrity of the personality. On the other hand, when we have a natural orientation to a spiritual life, when we enter that, we feel our questions are answered. We get an inner feeling that we are on the right track. That's a way to recognize it. They are totally different from delusions. Delusions have a disturbing effect in our personality and character. But this will have an integrating, harmonizing effect. Totally different in their consequences, effect. That's why I've seen that in many cases. When they start reading certain books, either in Sufism or Vedanta or in any tradition, they suddenly feel they are on the right track. And it doesn't depend upon any particular individual attraction or for an individual or teachings for a particular interaction for a particular book, nothing. The ideal somehow gives them the feeling, they have come back home in the field. That feeling comes. That's the difference. In delusions, you don't get this kind of feeling. You feel always a kind of dislocation within, feeling of psychological dislocation, disturbance, disharmony. Disharmony is inevitable in any kind of delusions or obsessions. But harmony and a feeling of integrity is inevitable in any spiritual tendencies. That's what happens.
Swamiji, in the second chapter, Krishna describes
yoga as
skillfulness in action.
Oh, yes. The verse is this, in the 50th verse, Buddhi yukto jahadhiha ubhe sugruduskade tasmad yoga yujjasa yoga karmasu kaushala. So this is meaning here. There are two verses coming, of course, one verse is between. The 48th verse is Yogastha kuru karmani sangam tektva dhananjaya siddhyo samabhuta samatam yoga uchyate. And this is the 48th. 50th verse is Buddhi yukto jahadhiga, etc. So 2 verses, I'm just giving the explanation. You got the book, you can see. In the first verse, Lord Krishna gives a psychological description of what is yoga. Means doing the work without bothering, without caring for the result. Siddhi means the expected positive result. Asiddhi means its opposite. Don't worry about it. In the 50th verse that you perhaps are referring to is this. Buddhi yukto jahadhiha ubhe sugruduskade tasmad yoga yujjasa yoga karma sugausalam. So here a yogi works. Yoga yujjaswa yoga karma sugausalam. Kausala means efficiency in action. Kausala here means the technique of changing action which normally binds us to this world into an action that liberates us from worldliness. Normally, an action done with a strong motive, desire, will have a binding effect. It binds you to this world. The same action done without motive, without any bondage, without any attachment, liberates you from bondage. That's why when you do certain things, all of you must, everyone will have this experience. When you have done something noble, you did not really do it for any benefit of your own, without any tangible benefit. You feel a kind of inner blissfulness, a kind of inner contentment. If a person makes a donation of $1 million and advertises in all newspapers, he won't have it. But if he does the same thing without informing anybody, anonymous, he will have the inner peace within. Same act, but from two different angles. The one who advertises, he wants recognition. And if he doesn't get enough recognition, it makes him unhappy. So there is no liberating effect. It binds you further. But the same act, if he does the same donation, if he gives the same donation without informing anybody for a noble cause, for some noble cause, he will have an inner peace which is much more expensive, much more costly than $1 million he has donated. It's not easily available in the markets, the inner peace within contentment. It liberates him from bondage. So every noble act, without a selfish motive, without any attachment, any desire for any beneficial, tangible, selfish benefits, will have a soothing effect in our own mind. This, everyone experiences this. A mother who looks after the child also will feel the same at one stage or other. In every human life situation, everyone experiences the same. Even the most selfish person will have some noble side in his mind. That it will have it is an indescribable feeling which a noble, unselfish act brings. That person may not be doing it for this experience, but still he will have it. If he does it for this experience, he will not have it. Total detachment, total unselfishness is necessary. That gives, I have done something. And it is said in the life of a great saint, it is written. In the Ishavasya Upanishad, there is a mantra. Agnenaya Subhadharaya, like that, there's a mantra. Kridambara means, Kridam Smara means, oh mind, the dying man tells his own mind, ask his own mind, oh my mind, remember all the good deeds you have done. If he remembers all the bad deeds he has done, then you can see on his face when he breathes his last. If a person remembers all the good deeds he has done, it will have a soothing effect. And these good deeds are unselfish, motiveless deeds. A blissful effect on the mind. That's why the dying man tells his own mind, oh my mind, please remember all the good deeds you have done. That's the idea behind. So it will have a kind of soothing effect. In pure psychological context, it will have a soothing, tranquilizing effect in our mind. In spiritual sense, it will have a liberating effect. It liberates the bondage in our mind. In a way, everybody is seeking this. You find there is a general principle. Every human being living this world is seeking this inner experience. But it is not available for money in the market. But he is trying to get it purchased in the market. Thinking that money can get this. He is trying to accumulate money. He doesn't get it. In fact, that's what Buddha saw in the face of the ascetic whom he saw, the four visions that changed his life, the sick man, the old man, and the dead body. And finally he saw an ascetic on whose face he saw something. He wanted that. He had everything else. He didn't have that. The Buddha as a prince was living in his palace. He had not experienced anything miserable or unhappy. So he had everything else, every happy, every luxurious item. But then he saw something on the face of the ascetic, which he could not understand or explain. So he told his charioteer, I want that. What is the matter with this him? He was not laughing widely, this man, and he was not worrying either. There was an expression on his face. It was neither worry nor jubilation. It was a kind of blissful attitude. In fact, that is what everybody is seeking. Only people are knocking on the wrong doors, that's all. That's the only difference. So unselfish act brings this. That's why yoga karmasu kausalam. Efficiency in action. Efficiency is not efficiency in the worldly sense in the management as it is defined in management books. Here efficiency means the technique of doing our work, our duty, performing our responsibility with total non-attachments. So that what normally binds us to this world as a selfish act, it may bind us to this world. It becomes a liberating agency. The same action liberates you from bondage. That's the meaning of kaushalam. Shankaracharya's definition, kushalasya bhavaha. Kushala means samatha, means very efficient. Efficiency not in the normal terms that is understood in management books. It means in the spiritual sense. Normally, actions performed with selfish motive and desire bind us to this world. But in this case, the same action done without any selfish motive breaks the chains that bind us to this world. That's the idea. So we will have the next class, please remember, on September the 19th at 7:30 p.m., the same hall. Thank you, namaskar, and wish you all a happy summer recess. Okay, thank you. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Sri Ramakrishna